Let's move on to our next question. We got something from Udoy on Patreon.
What are your individual recommended must-read books around the topic of minimalism? What books or online articles are you on right now?
Of course, there are no musts, there are no shoulds, there are no oughts.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, you ought to read this book. I'm not saying you must read it, but you ought to.
You ought to, yeah.
But here's the thing. I will talk about some books, and I think it's different in terms of, like, 'cause I'm not reading a bunch of minimalism books anymore now, but back in 2010, I was really intrigued by this. And also blogs as well. We've talked about blogs. I mean, if there's one minimalist blog to go to right away, it's Zen Habits. ZenHabits.net. Our friend Leo Babauta, you know him from our first film, Minimalism. He also has been on the Minimalist podcast before. Leo Babauta, his blog is stunning. It is the benchmark for all minimalist writing online. He's been doing it, I think, since 2006. So before Twitter, before Facebook was ubiquitous, he was blogging regularly. If you want some simple living insights, ZenHabits.net. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. I do have 10 books, though, for people who are interested in simple living or minimalism. Obviously, I would start with 2 of our books.
Of course.
So, Jordan, he'll put up the books here on the screen in the video version if you're watching the video version here. I mean, the first 2 books I would say is Everything That Remains and Love People Use Things.
Yeah.
Everything That Remains is a book that Ryan and I wrote when we left the corporate world. We moved to Montana, a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and wrote about this 5-year journey of being these suit and tie corporate guys and transforming into minimalists and eventually the minimalists, but just letting go of all the excess stuff. And that 5-year journey from the corporate world, and it starts out in a really dark place in the corporate world, and how we let go of the corporate world. We let go of the expectations. We let go of place. We let go of stuff. We let go of our homes. We let go of our past lives, of our identities, so that we could move forward. Our most recent book, Love People Use Things, is about the 7 essential relationships in our lives. And so you can check both of those out. But let me talk about some other people's books that have really resonated with me over the years. And if you all want to butt in, I'd be happy to hear that as well. So first off, if you're going to buy a minimalism book that isn't by the minimalist, I think Joshua Becker's book, Things That Matter, is a really strong book. Any book by Joshua Becker, but that one in particular, it's his most recent book. We had him on the podcast, and we did a whole episode called Things That Matter about the book. And he was able to talk about that and really understanding that there are some things, like actual things, that matter in our lives. But then the things that matter are usually not the things in our lives. The important things aren't the things at all. So Things That Matter. Way back in, I think, 2009, I read a book called The 100 Thing Challenge by Dave Bruno.
Wait, was that? No, that wasn't a PDF. He got published on that one, didn't he?
Yeah, it was a huge book. Bestseller book. 100 Thing Challenge. Dave Bruno for 1 year lived with just 100 items.
Yeah.
And the thing I remember from that book that really stood out to me is he learned this lesson that I was able to tweeze out of that book and carry forward with me. And that lesson is our things are not passive. If you own a thing, you have to take care of the thing. You have to worry about the thing. You have to clean the thing, replace the batteries in the thing, store the thing, make space for the thing, protect the thing, paint the thing. And when it's all said and done, you have to replace the thing. And so our things are not passive. They play an active role in our life. And so if you want more peace, you can't acquire more things to get more peace. The peace is uncovered through the act of subtracting. And so The 100 Thing Challenge by Dave Bruno. I would also say How to Be Here by Rob Bell. This isn't necessarily a minimalist book per se, but it is this foundational book. It had a huge role in my own life. When my wife read it, she left the university role. She was working for a university for a decade, and she read it and she realized, like, she had a lot of career clutter in her life. And the book How to Be Here by Rob Bell is really about reshaping your present and letting go of the past so we can be here right now. I buy that book by the case and still hand it out. We have a whole stack of them downstairs in the writer's room because it was such a powerful, short book.
Mm-hmm.
I've read it several times. I've handed it out to a bunch of people who I know will get value from it.
Yeah.
How to Be Here by Rob Bell.
That's a great recommendation for minimalist books because it's a foundation that really I think we're trying to lead people to, which is being able to be in the present, to be in the moment, to have a clutter-free mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a great book.
Because the clutter obviously extends well beyond the stuff. The stuff is the initial clutter. We have all these other types of clutter, including that mental clutter you're talking about. There's a great story in there. I won't run it for you, but he talks about the time where he had a traumatic brain injury and he was concussed and he let go of all of his memories. He was forced to.
Yeah.
And that actually brought him into the moment and taught him this lesson. He had to relearn like the names of his family even. Right? And so what a powerful exercise in letting go of the past and really being present.
Mm-hmm.
The next book is a book called Goodbye Things. You'll see it up here on the screen if you're watching the video version. It's by Fumio Sasaki, and it's really about the art of Japanese minimalism. So if you're looking into that, I'd certainly suggest that book first, Goodbye Things. And just for the sake of time, I'll go through a few others here. Colin Wright. Our good friend Colin Wright, Some Thoughts About Relationships. This is a book about relationship clutter, essentially.
Yeah.
And it is a book that I also buy by the case. And it helped in my own marriage. Bex and I, when we first met, we sat down and read a chapter a day together because these really short chapters, and they're not really chapters, he calls them policies. So, for example, one of the policies in there is the I will tell you policy. So, in a relationship, quite often you'll go up to someone and say, hey, what's wrong? Hey, everything okay? We don't do that. And the reason we don't do that is because I have the I will tell you policy. If something's wrong, I will tell you about it. And I got that from this book. And he has these like 30 or so policies that radically have enhanced my relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship or a business partner relationship, friendship, acquaintance, whatever. Having these policies set up are really setting up boundaries for our relationships to avoid having toxic relationships that we have to declutter later. The best way to let go is to let go in advance, right? A couple more for you real quick. Awareness by Anthony DeMello. If you're a longtime listener to the podcast, you know how it's probably my favorite book of all time. It's not a minimalist book per se, and I think it came out in the 80s, but it is a book about Anthony DeMello is a master of letting go. Letting go of the expectations that create the discontent in our lives. And the experiments and the insights he has in that book. I mean, there's not been a book that has had a more profound effect on me than Awareness by Anthony DeMello. So anyone who's an aspiring minimalist will want to check that out as well. Here's a practical one for you. The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey.
Yeah.
If you have debt, it is the best plan that I've ever come across to let go of financial clutter.
Yeah.
I buy that book by the case as well and hand it out. We know Dave now, but I used that book before I ever met Dave.
Yeah.
To get myself out of debt. Ryan did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I've seen that formula work for thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are struggling with excess financial clutter.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, any debt is financial clutter.
Yeah. Amen.
One final book for you. If you're looking for some pictures, this is a book about sort of the interior life or the interior of homes. It's by Natalie Walton. It's called The Slow Home. And it's about the slow movement, which I believe stands for sustainable, SLOW, organic, whole, what's the L? Local. Sustainable, local, organic, and whole. And so it's about slow living, slow interiors, getting the excess out of the way. You can see how it makes for a peaceful home. And a few other books while we're at it, just because a lot of those books I mentioned are written by guys. And I've been reading a lot of women's literature recently. In fact, we did a whole video about this on the How to Write Better channel about what people call chick lit, which I don't like the term because I think it's pejorative. But what I will say is that I've been reading a lot of women novelists. And here are four that have stood out to me over a period of time. Well, Mary Karr, she's actually a memoirist, one of my favorite writers. I'd put her on the Mount Rushmore of writers. Her writing is so beautiful. It's stunning.
Mm.
She has a great memoir called The Liars Club. A few other novels that I've read recently. You have a book by Catherine Lacey called The Answers. I've talked about it on this podcast. Emily Gold. I read this book during the break. It's called Friendship. I found it. I was getting a medical procedure done overseas, and I went to a coffee shop. I didn't have a book to read, and I just grabbed one off the shelf, and it was this book. And it's called Friendship. It was so, so good. It's about these women who are getting ready to turn 30, and they're really struggling with this period of life because they finally feel like they're not children anymore, but they're still feeling those tugs of immaturity. My first novel was kind of about this as well. It was called As a Decade Fades. It was about a 29-year-old singer-songwriter who was letting go of that immaturity to move forward. And finally, Acts of Service is another book by Lillian Fishman. I think I talked about it on the podcast, Malabama.
Yeah, that was an added value on a segment last year.
Yeah. It's just a wonderful, beautiful. The writing in it is so stunning. The gorgeous sentences, the storytelling. You feel like you're immersed in the characters. So generally, I'm bringing these 4 books up because I read a lot more fiction than I read nonfiction. I don't read a whole lot of nonfiction anymore because I find a lot of truth not in prescriptive nonfiction, but in the interior lives of characters that are written about by authors who really cherish the written word.
That observation, that's an episode unto itself.
Yeah, that's good, man.
The manner in which story delivers without prescription, the opportunity for epiphany.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.